Hello, welcome to episode 0 of the Pinball Machine podcast. I am your host, Pinball, and I want to talk to you about interesting gaming topics and gaming related issues. I am a huge fan of video games, and it is one of many things that I am passionate about. Today I am going to be talking about the recent cheating controversy within the Pokemon community. This podcast will be an auditory experience, so please feel free to listen whenever it is convenient. Sit back, relax, and let's delve into today's topic. When it comes to competitions, cheating is a very serious problem because it undermines the notion of fairness that should prevail. However, what happens when the cheaters don't actually have an advantage? Are they actually doing anything wrong? Listen to the story and come to your own conclusions. During the recent Pokemon Worlds tournament, many well-known competitive players were disqualified for cheating, but it's more complicated than you think. Cheating, within the context of a contest, means to do something in order to give yourself an advantage over other players. But is that what these pro players were doing? Not exactly. The reason for the disqualification was that these players illegally obtained their Pokemon. How is that possible? Well, fairly easy actually. There are a number of third-party tools and programs that can be used to generate a Pokemon automatically from scratch. These tools also allow you to customize your Pokemon to your liking, and in fairness, these tools can be used to give your Pokemon an unfair advantage. Despite the fact that these tools can be used to cheat in that way, none of these pro players have actually done that, to my knowledge. So what did they do? Well, allow me to explain. Competitive Pokemon is a pretty interesting side of the franchise that will have you learn way more about the game's systems and mechanics than what you would learn about normally just playing them. What does this have to do with the cheaters? Well, Pokemon contains two mechanics that aren't shown directly to the player, and even in the modern titles, they are shown to the player, but still not very directly. It's still kind of vague and just not, direct. These mechanics are called EVs and IVs. These are hidden stats that do make your Pokemon stronger. EVs are stat points gained from defeating enemy Pokemon, and getting enough of them will increase a particular stat. You can only have 510 EVs in total, or 255 max in a single stat. IVs are a random number between 1 and 31 and assigned to each stat. The higher the IV, the higher the stat, and they are randomly generated. The implementation of these mechanics was to, at least in my opinion, sort of emulate the way that animals work in the real world. DNA, stuff like that. The reason why I believe this is because if these mechanics weren't in the games, every Pokemon would essentially be the same. But with EVs and IVs and other mechanics that I'm not going to get too much into here, it allows two Pokemon that are essentially the same species be completely different in terms of their stats and abilities. So that's why these mechanics are implemented the way they are. These two mechanics are one of the main reasons these cheaters did what they did, but there is more to it. The main problem that many pro players face is the amount of time it takes to build a competitive team. This process will take you multiple hours depending on what tools you use to make it easier on yourself. For example, a YouTuber called I'm a Blissey built a competitive team using many time-saving methods, and it still took him over 17 hours to build this team. Note that this also took place across many games, not just the newest game in the franchise, but even games that are almost, if not already, decades old. The problem is that even though 17 hours doesn't seem like a long time, you have to consider other variables, such as, in this example, he used many time-saving methods. These methods included things such as a turbo controller to consistently press buttons as fast as you inhumanly can in order to speed up certain parts of the process. He used RNG manipulation, which I know is a term that some people might not understand, but to break it down simply, he used a tool that allowed him to see the random number generator that would guarantee him a Pokemon with a particular stat that he wanted, or a particular quality he wanted. He didn't necessarily do anything to the game's code to make it easier. He was just looking at it to know what he could do, like to save time. Not only that, you also have to consider that not everyone has infinite free time, and it is entirely possible for someone to have to redo that process if the team they build doesn't give them the results they wanted. The process is also very involved. What is this process? Well, it goes a little something like this. First off, you have to know what Pokemon are eligible for tournament use. There are resources, official resources you can look up to know what Pokemon can be used in a tournament, which ones can't be used in a tournament. Typically, when it comes to official tournaments, it's whatever the newest game installed, but there are exceptions, especially within this example, which I will talk about later. 2. You have to decide which Pokemon you want to use. This process can take some time as well because there are a great number of Pokemon. Even though the current tournament meta, or the rule set used to describe how you play the tournament, might not have all the Pokemon eligible, you still have to sift through a good few hundred choices. You have to know what moves they learn, what their stats are, and what abilities they have. The problem with this is that many games do not actually tell you any of this information. It'll tell you what moves they can learn if you're using a particular item, but you aren't going to learn their entire moveset to be able to build them competitively. Many players have to use outside third-party resources such as Bulbapedia, Cerebi, and other websites that are not official sources of this information, but are built by fans who know how important these repositories are needed for competitive. Next, you have to develop a strategy based around your chosen 6. This is where the more complex part of the mechanics come out to play, because Pokemon can have multiple different playstyles depending on how you've built them, different abilities that can come into play, different moves, different stats. It's one of the reasons why building a team can be a very time-consuming strategy or activity, because you can't always get the correct 100% objectively best team the first time you do it. Then you have to build the team. This is going to be the most time-consuming part of this, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, depending on, if you decide to cheat like these players, or if you decide to do what Blissey did and use some time-saving methods. Then you have to find a way to test the team. Now this, depending on what kind of player you are, this might be easy, this might be hard. The problem is that many competitive players don't consider the main games to be an effective test of their competitive team, because it's possible that you're going to be playing against people who aren't building their teams competitively. So, once again, players seek out third-party programs that allow them to build a competitive team and use them and test them. An example of this would be Pokemon Showdown, which is an online free program. It's a website that will allow you to build a team out of all of the Pokemon currently in existence within certain rule sets and test them out competitively. And that's how a lot of pro players build their repertoire, build their skills. And unfortunately, there's nothing in the games that allow them to do anything similar to Showdown. The last step is either you're tournament ready, or you try again if you didn't get the desired results, and you have to redo all of these steps. Of course, you don't obviously have to do the first two every time, but the point is, you might have to repeat this process, and it is very time consuming. Now, some of these tasks may seem straightforward. They may not all be able to be used with official resources, like I've said earlier. The official resources for some of these games don't list all of the information that would be pertinent to be used in competitive. And then you have to seek out third-party resources. There's also the problem of paywalls. Some Pokemon cost money to obtain, depending on what games you decided to buy. For example, in the current tournament scene, the current tournament rule set, many Pokemon from the last two games, Brilliant Diamond / Shining Pearl and Legends Arceus, were made tournament legal. However, these two games never had official tournaments held for them when they were new, so many pro players didn't buy them because they had no reason to. No tournaments, I'm not playing them. Now, if they want a Pokemon like Ursaluna or Landorus, they have to fork over $60 in order to obtain that one Pokemon that might just be the linchpin of their competitive team. Now, I know what some of you might say. If they're cheating, then they're cheating. But all these cheaters are doing is skipping that 17-hour process. That's it. Nothing they are doing is giving them an advantage. They aren't giving their Pokemon illegal moves, stats, or anything. There is objectively no difference between a team that has one or more generated Pokemon and a team that was obtained legally. What's my take? Well, personally, I don't care if someone decides to generate Pokemon. As I said before, the players who do this do not have an advantage over those who don't. It is only a time difference. A player with generated Pokemon simply skips the time it takes to build their team, but in all other categories it is objectively an even playing field. Despite my support for these cheaters, I understand the issues with using third-party software, and in fairness, there have been times in the past where people generated illegal Pokemon with illegal stats and traded them amongst other players. And that is not a good thing. Other people have compared this to using performance-enhancing drugs, but I find this to be an unfair comparison because, once again, there is no enhancement being done. At the end of the day, I think banning these players does nothing, especially if they have proven that they can compete. Because let's make one thing perfectly clear. Going through the process to build a team is not part of the competition. You are not going to be given an award for simply doing what everyone else is intended to do. You still have to have great game knowledge and the ability to plan and act on strategies that you made. Because it is entirely possible for someone who quote-unquote cheated by generating a Pokemon or generating their team by losing. They can lose. It's possible for them to lose. It's entirely possible for them to do that. Is there a solution here? Yes. If there is a solution to be had here, I think that the companies behind the Pokemon games should do one of two things. Number one, reduce the amount of time it takes to build a competitive team. They could do this by implementing mechanics that speed up certain aspects of the process or just make it outright easier overall. My personal suggestion would be to add mechanics seen in fan projects, such as an item called the Stat Scanner. Essentially, what the item allows you to do is directly look at those hidden stats that the games do not typically show you in the official products. Number 2. Create an official game or program that can be used as an evergreen solution for tournaments and that allows you to build whatever team you want. Essentially, this would mean Game Freak, the developers behind the Pokemon games, would develop a program similar to Pokemon Showdown. The difference here is that it would be official. It would include all the thousands of Pokemon that are currently available to be played with and allows players to build them however they want. whether it be casually or competitively. And so this way, you don't have to base your rule set on a game, or rather, every new game that comes out, you don't have to base your rule set over that new game. You can instead base your rule set over an evergreen product that you can update, patch, change, do whatever you need to do to make the game interesting. You don't have to worry about whatever changes you added to the newest game and then think about new changes after that. It'll just be there whenever you need it to be. If the creators did any of these suggested solutions, then I do believe people would stop cheating, because they would have no reason to generate a team. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might like this type of content.